This episode is sponsored by Day by Day Book, a guided journal that helps you navigate the ups and downs of change while creating a life you love. For more information on the classic, recovery, or teen day book, go to livedaybyday.com.
I know that my life is divinely led, and I know that there is a higher power, my higher power, that is in control of my life. And I know that from time to time, I need to learn some things. And that's what change is about for me. And so that would be where I would start with my advice. Anybody who feels resistant to or stuck in change, or even maybe scared of change that's happening, it is for your greater learning and to advance you with your soul's work in this lifetime and on your journey. And so if you can embrace it that way and try to look at it, what am I meant to learn? What's happening here? And what am I meant to learn can be quite often, there are things in my life that are not for my highest and best good, and it's now time for me to shed those.
Welcome to Journeys Through Change, a podcast that inspires women to let go of the fear and say yes to possibility. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, creator, and empowerment coach who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders ride the waves of change with ease and grace. I now work with women to step into change and unleash the power they have to create a life they love. Whether you're contemplating a change in your career, relationship, health, lifestyle, or anything in between, nothing's off the table. I'll be offering up simple insights to help you manage the ups and downs of change, and sharing interviews with successful women who took a leap of faith to create the life they knew they were meant to live, sharing their wisdom, advice, and all the juicy lessons they learned along the way. So get cozy in your favorite comfy chair and let's get started. The memories of our past are often a blueprint of how we live our lives today. They give us a glimpse of who we are and often shape our choices as we move into adulthood. They paint the picture of our experience within our family, but how much do they actually tell us about the generations that came before us? Beth Jones experienced past abuse that didn't form a full picture in her memory until later in life. Once realized, she began piecing together the generational trauma that had been present within her family for years. She recently transitioned from a 30-year career in professional services and has made it her mission to stop the cycle of dysfunction while empowering other survivors to heal from the pain of trauma and abuse. Beth's passion for helping other survivors of trauma and abuse to walk their healing pathways led her to write her forthcoming book, Becoming an Empowered Survivor. You too can heal from trauma and abuse. This book, along with the creation of the Empowered Survivors community, has been a beacon of inspiration for many. As a speaker, her message to her audiences follows the title of her book, You Too Can Heal: Hope, Evolve, and Love. With deep Texan roots, Beth is a citizen of the world, having grown up in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Beth became a best-selling author by contributing a chapter about her life experience to the collaborative book, Step Into Your Brave, uplifting stories to inspire courage, strength, and growth. Beth, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so you are in Texas right now.
I am in Texas right now.
You are in Texas right now, so you probably experience a little bit of maybe some heat.
Yes, although I think this morning when I got up, it was below 60 degrees. So we're having that little tiny touch of fall for a day or two, but it'll be back to the Texas summer here and probably by the end of the week.
Yeah. But then in October, then it just turns into fall, doesn't it?
At some point, yes. There are many days in October, 31. So if you're at the front or the end, depends. Right. But hopefully in October it will.
That's good. I'm pulling for you.
Thank you.
We should probably just start, I guess, from where you would like to start, because I know there's been a couple of different pivotal moments in your life. And I think it's best for you to pick kind of what is the first one that you want to share with us. And you can give us a little bit of background too. Maybe that's a good way to start us off, is just kind of a little background about you, and then we can go from there.
Sure. So I think how I would summarize my life, and it's relevant given the title of this podcast, which is Journeys Through Change, is that my life has both a significant aspect of personal transformation and along with that, professional transformation. The person who I am today, talking to you, is a very different person, radically different person than the person who I was 4 years ago. The background there, the backstory is that 4 years ago, I underwent a life-altering event, which many of us who go through what I've been through since then, which has been this amazing healing journey that I've been on to heal myself from my past, Many of us who find ourselves at the point where we get the opportunity to heal have some sort of life altering or earth shattering event that happens to us. That's common. Mine happened to be a hypnotherapy session, and I don't think that means anything other than that's how the universe decided it was time for me to become aware of the fact that I am a victim of some pretty awful things in my past, but also that it was time for me to heal. And so I had the hypnotherapy event where I discovered some truths about myself in my conscious mind. Things that have been buried subconsciously for a long time suddenly came to the forefront in my conscious mind. And when I came to my conscious awareness on the backside of that hypnotherapy session, I literally had the feeling that I had no idea who I was and that everything about what my life was at that point in time was a lie. And so I had to change, I had to heal from that and I had to transform myself, which is what I've done now.
What's fascinating to me is how you describe that this all kind of came about within a particular session. Was there anything leading up to it? When you say that you kind of had this feeling that you weren't really sure who you were after the fact, what was the impetus for you to do? Were you just doing this session for just personal growth reasons, like you were going to go or were you looking for some answers?
Yeah, I would put it in the personal growth category. I think that's a great way to categorize it. About 3 months before the hypnotherapy, I had been promoted to a leadership role in my organization. And that role meant that I was going to be shifting from a project focus, so doing the work that I used to do. So I was a white collar crime and fraud investigator, and so my work previously had really been focused on the investigation and on the project and how do we get from the beginning to the end. In my new role, in my leadership role, I was responsible for people, and I was responsible for people in my primary role, but this was different because my role was now going to be spending 80% of my time with people, whether they were the team members or our clients, around growing and managing the practice. Whereas before, we just need to get the project done. Like, it was a very different level of engagement with people. And I actually felt trepidation about that. I was nervous about my ability to do it. And so I shared it with I'm a medical doctor, and she's like, "Oh, well, we have this therapist on staff that does hypnotherapy. It's the kind of stuff you do if you want to quit smoking or lose weight, and so you might give it a try." And so I literally went in for personal growth reasons, and then the universe was in a different place. The universe was ready for me to start healing. So yeah, it was very different than what I expected. I will say though about was I seeking something for years before the hypnotherapy? I had tried for, I don't know, probably 25 years or so, off and on, to engage with healing, including that I've been to a lot of different therapy and therapists and different modalities trying to get some. I was like feeding this need inside of me to get help, but I never knew why I needed help, and so I could never engage with those therapists in a way that did anything for me. So it's into what a broad category of what I call couch therapy, where I really never got much out of it until I knew what I was dealing with post hypnotherapy.
Okay, so the revelations that you make after this session are what? Like what came out of it that was this pivotal shift for you?
In the session itself, so I'd had three events that were living in my subconscious mind independently of one another, and they all had occurred about 15 years earlier, within a few weeks of each other, but I had never put them together as being linked. And so those three events were that I have a family member who came out with her story about having been abused by the same person in our family that abused me. And so she was also describing her experience having been sexually abused, and so she's describing what happened to her. That was one event. The second event was that pretty much immediately I had my own memory of the first time that he abused me. Right? And one of the only really vivid memories that I have in my mind. And within a few weeks of those two things happening, the third event is that I started having a recurring nightmare. And I never understood the recurring nightmare for 15 years until I'm in hypnotherapy, when I am made very aware of what the nightmare meant, and in particular where the nightmare was taking place. I never recognized taking place in a house, and I never recognized the house before the hypnotherapy. But in hypnotherapy, I knew exactly where I was, and other things that were happening brought all three of those events together. So when I wake up, I'm like, oh, I get it. That really happened to me. So even though I knew it happened to me, I had sort of put it out of my mind, right? I wasn't accepting the fact that I had actually been a victim of that. I was a victim of some other things as well in the family generational trauma category, because it kind of goes downhill. Right? This was my grandfather, and then my parents' generation experienced him, and then my generation, and it kind of rolls down, right? In different ways, we've had our experiences with him, and I fairly certain that he was probably someone who was abused himself, and so it was just kind of rolling down to the hill. So I became very aware of that, and then also the other thing is that I suddenly then had to see myself as a survivor, which I had been for 45 years at that point in time, and would go on to learn about how I had been surviving my life, and not in some great ways, and had to shed all of that, get all those masks off of me, the personal transformation part.
Well, and that just feels almost like you've just been delivered a package that now you have to completely unpack. Like,
That's a great way to put it.
you know what I mean? It's like, okay, in a way, I would think that there's, I don't know if the word's right to say liberation, because it's not necessarily that, but potentially an understanding, a more deeper understanding of like, oh, okay, so this is what I got to work through.
Yeah, and it was the delivery of a package, although it wasn't like a birthday package or a Christmas package. It
No,
wasn't anything like that, right?
not a good one.
But you are correct. The word liberation is a good word, and I use the word freedom a lot, and that's what I really have. One of the benefits of what I've been through is full freedom to know myself and full freedom to be authentically who I am because I know who I am and I'm completely unapologetic about that, right? And so a lot of what I've been doing in my life is freeing myself of the bondage of having been a victim and then surviving my life, the surviving, not really living or thriving, but surviving for so many years.
Did it give you answers to some questions that you had? Because I think about as we go through life and we know who we know who we are, quote unquote, right? We have an idea of what we're about and what we like and what we don't like. And we're very aware of our own hangups, right? I mean, we understand where we fall short. We understand where things can be really prickly for us. Did you feel like that sort of shed some light to like, oh, okay, this helps, I mean, in a way, helping to understand better, I don't know, relationships. I mean, it could
Yes,
be anything, right?
yes, and I talk about this a lot. The framework that I use when I talk to people about the healing process itself, the healing
Mhm.
journey. It's the acronym for HEAL that I use, which for me is hope, evolve, and love, is action. And the action of evolving is very much about self discovery. So it's about evolving the healing tools that we use to be able to progress, but it's also about figuring out and learning who we are. And so it was, for me, one of the most profound things for me through the healing process was knowledge. And so for years before I started my journey, I could describe to you conceptually or give you the definition to actual terms that characterize behaviors and terms that go with those that characterize survivorship. Right? And so I'll give you an example of that. So there's a lovely term out there called the parentectomy, and it means exactly what you would think it would mean. An ectomy is cutting off something that's trying to harm you or kill you. In this case, it's a parent, and I had done that. So I had exiled my parent probably some 10 or 12 years before I had the hypnotherapy. And I had done that because I felt very constrained in the relationship with my parents. They were not healthy. And the only way the relationships were not healthy, mine with either of my parents. And the only way that I could see for me to stop the pain that I was feeling was just to separate, just to leave the relationship altogether. I undertook what's effectively called the parentectomy. Now, when I did that, I cut off my entire family, which was losing my parents was one consequence, but losing my entire family was another consequence. The good news, fast forward, I
Yes,
now have a
yes.
relationship with all of them, with my parents and my family. So I've reclaimed them all, as I say, and that is a result of having done the healing work that I've done. But I could describe that process to people when you would just engage, like in the work environment, right? You engage in a conversation with somebody about your parents and you come up over lunch with somebody you've just met, right? And I would always have to work through this process to make sure that I didn't have a relationship with them, but it was not because I was a black sheep of the family and they had kicked me out of the family, but it was because I had chosen to leave the family and separate myself. So I could explain that, but this word, parentectomy, I'd never heard before. So I find this amazing word in a book that I'm reading about people who are survivors of trauma and abuse, right? It was an amazing discovery for me because I was like, oh, there's like suddenly this word that describes what I've done. And oh, I realize now that it's so common, so frequent for people like me, people with, as I would say back then, my condition, because I was trying to understand these things. They've given it a label. The smart people have given it a label because we do it so often, which, for me, it was profound. It was very enlightening. And I was like, oh, it was like the hand of God reaching down and touching me and saying, you're okay. You're actually okay. And there are other people like you, which kind of sucks because there are other people like me. And so they write about us. And it's also the work that I do now because there's still more people like me out there that need to heal. But that was profound for me. So it was that type of awareness that I began to get. I saw myself as a survivor. And as I saw myself as a survivor of various things about my life, that gave me comfort in that group of being a survivor of trauma and abuse. And it also made me, the flip side of that is coming to accept the fact that I actually had been a victim of the things that I had experienced in my life, which I really didn't give it the credit that it deserved for the impact that it had on my life. And I don't think most of us do as survivors. We don't really give it the credit that it's due. And so that's really what it was more about for me. Like I knew these things had happened to me, but I didn't, I didn't realize, I used to say that my grandfather touched me inappropriately. No, he sexually abused me, right? I mean, call it what it actually is, right? And so it was that kind of shift into accepting my reality that really were the change for me.
And when you say this examy, which I had never heard that word before, and it almost is like a coping, not a coping mechanism, but a way for you to be able to extricate yourself to then heal from something. I mean,
Yes.
is that kind of the concept? It's like distancing yourself from whatever it might be. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your parents are the core root of the problem, but they could be something that brings that problem or that issue or that dysfunction into such awareness that you're unable to kind of extricate yourself enough to heal. So you have to kind of do that as almost like and I keep saying coping mechanism, but I can't think of a better way to put it. Like
It is a coping mechanism. Yes, it's part of what I call. I mean, it's survivorship. It's what I lump into the category of unhealthy survivorship, right? So it was not one of the great ways that I was living my life either in the moment before I undertook the parenectomy with my parents, because we're all survivors. We were living in this toxic relationship that we were having with each other, so that wasn't great. But neither, and while I had relief from that, and that's what I was really seeking, was relief from that painful interaction that I was having with my parents. While I got that, I also now didn't have my parents or my family anymore, right? So, I mean, there was relief in moving past the pain of the interactions, but it was a whole new type of pain that I had because there was now a massive void that was there because I didn't have them. It very much was about trying to move forward in the healing process. And at the time, it was the only thing that I could see to do with respect to my relationship with my parents.
and it's in a way a survivor instinct to do something like that.
Yes.
Even if it maybe in hindsight, you say, oh, well, then it took me away from my parents, but that's kind of the road you had to take.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was the journey that I had to take. And one of the reasons for that is now I have this beautiful story because I get to say to people, I exiled them, but then because of my work and some work they've done, we've been able to come back together, right? Which is an amazing gift out of the process, right? But it very much was part of the journey, right? And the 4F responses: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? So for me, leaving that relationship was flight from the relationship, right? And I've done that. I can see in my life, I've done that a few times where my primary responses are freeze and fawn. I'm not really a fight flight person, although I've done things that are fight and I have done things that are flight. And that was one of my flights, was to leave that. Some people also would say that it's, I suffer from dissociation, dissociative amnesia, where I just don't record a lot when I'm in a challenging, difficult, traumatic situation. I just don't record what's happening to me, which can be frustrating, but I'm working on that to not do that anymore. But some people would say that the parenectomy was also a form of dissociation, right? Just leaving that relationship.
Well, and you figure we do gravitate towards comfort, don't we? I mean, that's an instinct where it's like painful, not painful. I think I'll go to the not so painful side.
Yeah, and it just turns out that sometimes when you go from painful to not so painful, there's still pain, right? Because you're not healed. You haven't actually done the healing work that you need to do to not have that pain anymore.
But isn't it great? I'm just going to say this, Beth, because I know we talked a little bit about this when we were talking initially. But to be at a stage in life that you can now retrospectively look back on sort of the ups and downs that have gotten you here. I mean, there is such a gift to that. And I say this because when I was in my 20s or my 30s, and you don't, I mean, which end is up, right? And not to say that it's that chaotic, but when we look back on it, it's like, okay, now it's like to be able to really be grounded in the journey that you've had so far and be like, okay, yeah, that was a dip. And then I came back out of that. And this is leading me to my next question for you, because you had mentioned this to me and I love it. I love it. I love it. That you have said that you embrace change. You have always embraced change. So I want to hear more about that. Like, what does that mean to you?
One of the things that I know about myself is I am highly unresistant to change. I mean, it showed up a lot in my personal life, but also in my professional life. And I'm one of those people, you get on a path and you're moving down the path, or a plan, as some of us call it. I have this plan that whether it's my short term or my midterm or my long term plan. And I'm one of those people that when I encounter the first roadblock, hurdle, wall, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to figure out how to get around it. And I just embrace that. So there's natural change in that process when you have to deviate from your plan and go in a different direction. Sometimes life just does that to you, right? It throws us things that require us to change in order to be able to move forward. And the phrase is out there, change is the only constant in this world, because that's true, right? Life is always about change. I'm just one of those fortunate people who don't get derailed by change, even as significant as it may be. You know, I've had a lot of change in my life, and I've had a lot of change in some short periods of time, right? So post hypnotherapy, within 2 years post hypnotherapy, I was living in Hong Kong at the time, and it was in COVID. So I'd been through COVID. I had gone through my own year of really, really intense and focused healing, which was really challenging. The result of my healing process is that I exited a 30-year marriage that was no longer serving my highest and best good. And I moved back to the US from Hong Kong back to the US. And although I returned with the company that I was working for, I was moving to a completely new environment, and so effectively changing jobs. So I went through a significant amount of change in a very short period of time. And I think I just did it with grace, if I can use that word.
But here's the question. So to somebody that maybe is not that way about change, is there any kind of advice you would give? Because I mean, we all know kind of how we react to change. We just kind of know ourselves. And sometimes you don't realize how you're going to react until it happens, and then it's just something completely different than what you expected. But by and large, like, do you just go to the solution? Do you go, like you said, you kind of are, you know how to work around it. And it sounds like in your role professionally, that probably serves you really, really well too, right? It's like some people just have that kind of brain. They just know it's like, okay, well, let's find the way. Let's figure it out. And I know I have learned in the past year more than I'd ever want to know about the beauty of not reacting to change emotionally, but looking at it as kind of a path. But it's hard to articulate what that is like. So I'm curious, like when something like that, you go through a divorce and now you're moving back out of a country back to the US. Like, were there moments that you had to just kind of say to yourself, or do you just feel like it just doesn't really phase you?
It doesn't phase me, but what I will say, I'm deeply spiritual. I learned this amazing word recently that I'm an omniist. Apparently, is what I am. Which I had never heard that before, but an omniist means that I think there's truth in every religion and belief and practice that's out there, but I don't think that anyone knows all the truth. So you need them all to get the truth for me, right? Which I love. I'm like, oh, an omniist. That's fantastic. It's great. But I know that my life is divinely led, and I know that there is a higher power, my higher power, that is in control of my life. And I know that from time to time I need to learn some things. And that's what change is about for me. And so that would be where I would start with my advice to anybody who feels resistant to or stuck in change, or even maybe scared of change that's happening. It is for your greater learning and to advance you with your soul's work in this lifetime and on your journey. And so if you can embrace it that way and try to look at it, what am I meant to learn? What's happening here? And what am I meant to learn can be quite often, there are things in my life that are not for my highest and best good, and it's now time for me to shed those. And that's part of what that change can be about that. And my divorce was a great example of that, right? So I'm at a point where, and I don't mean to be flippant about the change of going through a divorce, because it's significant, it's massive, and there was I had to get through a lot of pain, right? I had to deal with a lot of pain and a lot of healing that came through that, right? But I also know that that relationship was no longer serving my highest and best good. And that's not to say anything about the other individual. It was me and who I am and who I was becoming, which is the person who I actually am, taking off all these masks that I was wearing, including my marriage, that no longer served me, right? And so if you can see change that way at a spiritual level or a karmic level, God intervening in your life to help move you in a different direction, I think that's a great place to start. And I think the other thing, I said it just a minute ago, right? I mean, the only constant in this world is change. And if you can accept that, life is always changing and always moving, that's helpful too in being able to embrace the change and look for what it is that you're meant to learn or adjust in your life as a result of the change you're facing.
I mean, you have proof too, right? When you think back on what goes on in our lives and the lessons that are learned and the pain that then brings you out of that trough of whatever that is and brings you back up to the surface. Those are the kinds of things that, because I always think about like my belief system is so often based, at least in my experience, I base it on like, well, I mean, how do I prove that? How can I prove that right or wrong? Like, is this something I've noticed in the past? Has that been good for me in the past? And if you have enough of those things happening that you've looked back on and gone, you know what? Yeah, that was a really crappy year. And then guess what happened after that? It's almost like, the more you can look to what's happened, it's more proof that that's actually true.
Completely agree with you.
So tell us a little bit just about what you're doing with others on this.
Yeah, so one of those change things that I experienced, this is where the professional transformation comes into play. So I've known for probably 3 years now. 3 years ago, I began to recognize the power of my story and this amazing journey that I've been on, really the healing journey, right? But my life as a whole. And I started trying to figure out how I was going to share my story because I knew it needed to be told and I had no idea what that meant in the beginning and it was all over the place. And so I went on a subpath, if you will, to figure out how to get my story out, right? And to share my message, which you read it in the beginning, right? I mean, it's that you too can heal. And that's my message that I have to other survivors of trauma and abuse. If I've done it, you can do it too. And I'd love to help you. Talk to you about how I did it, right? And hopefully to inspire you, and hopefully people listening to this are going to be inspired if they need to walk that pathway and to start walking. I'm still very much employed in the job that I described earlier, and I set out to write. So I wrote my story in what I call the Cliff Notes version. Came out in a chapter of a book, a collaborative book, about 2 years ago. And that was public when it came out. I was very public about that and very public on social media, including on LinkedIn, which is where all of my, a lot of my colleagues follow what I'm doing and my clients and professionally, right? So I was very public about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year ago, I made the decision to write my forthcoming book. And I've been very public about that from the time that I decided to write the book and the whole process of writing the book, right? So I don't hide any of it. At the same time, I'd been telling my employer, so I was under a contract that was supposed to expire at the end of next year, at the end of 2025. But I'd been telling them for a while that I was not going to renew my contract to do the same work for them that I was doing or had been doing in the past. That I liked the organization, I could stay on within the organization, but it had to be in a different capacity. And a lot of that has to do with like measurement and compensation and all of that. And I just didn't like the structure I was under anymore. It didn't fit with me and my purpose anymore. It was misaligned. And so I was being vocal about that. Well, they decided earlier this year that they were going to do some things to implement a midterm and a long-term strategy for the part of the business that I was in. And by definition, my 18 months that I have remaining with you did not fit that midterm or long-term definition. And so they found it very easy to say, your life is going in a different direction, we're going in a different direction, so it's time for us to separate. And so they separated me earlier this year. But I knew that it was the universe saying to me, it's time for you to go do this work, the work that I'm doing now, right? To be a healing mentor and get my story out into the world more broadly and really focus on telling my story and engaging with people to inspire them to walk their healing pathway. And so the universe did it for me. But it's amazing. I mean, it was, I sort of suddenly found myself stepping into this sea of unknown. But I'm figuring it out. I mean, I know the path is there. I know the universe has a plan and knows what it's doing with my life. And I trust that. And I've seen it now for I've seen it my whole life, but I've really seen it for the last 4 years. And so I had no doubt about that, that is now the professional transformations. I've left the old world that I lived in and the way that I used to work in professional services. And now I'm focusing entirely on my mission, which is to get my message out in the world to help people. Right. So that is where the book comes in, because that is the process that I went through to help me crystallize my message, to know what it is that I want to say to people, and to build my framework, the heal, the Hope of All and Love framework, and all of that came through writing the book, which was an amazing process. So I'm learning to tell my story through the book, but it's also the universe teaching me, well, this is how you're going to work with people, and this is how you're going to teach people about what you've been through and talk to them about it, right? So that's been a beautiful experience. So it's time. The universe said it was time earlier this year, and that was 2 months ago, and now the book's coming out in a month, actually 4 weeks from tomorrow. So today is, we're recording on September the 9th. It comes out on October the 8th. I don't know when exactly this is going to hit the air, but yeah, it's time. It's time for me to be out doing that work fully, and I am embracing it 100%.
That is wonderful. And I am excited for the book to come out. I cannot wait. The thing is, I feel like, especially writing your first book, getting yourself out there, you mentioned LinkedIn. I get that. I get that, of like putting your story out. And yes, actually, I am going to be sharing it with people that I have worked with for many, many years. And that to some people may not seem like a big deal, but it's a pretty big deal. So I commend you on all of that. It's like steps though, right? It's almost like it pulls you forward incrementally. And right now the book is just going to be that much more of like, I mean, are you going to are you going to do speaking
Yes,
engagements and things like
yes,
that?
yes. In fact, I'm actively working on that. I've been practicing today. I'm going in 2 weeks to record what's called a speaker reel, so people will be able to see me standing
Yes.
on a stage and speaking and doing all of that. So yeah, that is coming, and I know that's one of my primary outlets for my message, is to be speaking to audiences, whether it's in this type of environment on a podcast or I'm doing it on a stage somewhere. So that is definitely coming for me, and I'm excited. I'm ready for that. So it's funny when you're talking about sharing the message on LinkedIn and with colleagues. My experience with that is that I actually had a very good experience because of the role that I had at the time when I underwent the hypnotherapy, and because of what I went through. The hypnotherapy session itself was one of the most terrifying events that I've ever been through in my life. But waking up literally to the realization that you have no idea who you are, and like everything about your life for the previous 50 years has just been a lie, and you've helped to make it up in your own mind. And with the life you lived, you've kind of helped to make up who you were. That realization was terrifying for me, because I was like, I don't know who I am. And if I don't know who I am, then nobody else can possibly know who I really am. And that was a terrifying realization for me that I had to get past. I went into the first few months after the hypnotherapy session, really emotional distress. So it was like this roller coaster all over the place. I'm a very in control of my emotions for the most part. It can be provoked anger. I can get sad. We all can. But for the most part, I'm in control of my emotions. But for probably 3 or 4 months after the hypnotherapy, I was all over the place. And what I now know is that it was years of emotion that I had stored inside of me that had to come out. Right. So I was this very flat, even keeled kind of rock person, but that's because I just had shoved it all inside of myself, and it had to go. It had to come out. And there were days when, I didn't want to get out of bed, that I had this role at work and responsibility and accountability that I couldn't just turn my back on. And so I had to engage within my organization in order to successfully navigate both of the things that I was facing, my responsibilities at work, but also this personal situation that had now suddenly, this awakening that I had that was not a great awakening, right? It was not in a good place. I engaged with openly and authentically. That's who I am. I'm a very transparent person. You sort of get what you see when you meet me. But that's how I engaged with the people that I was working with. So in my organization, and also my clients and people who I had come to have some level of relationship with, more than just kind of a business relationship. Even though I had a hard time engaging in relationships, I had advanced in some places. But telling those people about what I was experiencing, and back in those days, I had like such a rudimentary understanding of what I was dealing with, and my ability to talk about what I was dealing with was just all over the place, and I couldn't in many cases. But I asked for help, and I told them I'm not, I'm still here, but I need help. And I got what I asked for. I got what I needed. And so that was an amazing experience. But what I found through that, and this is where I really began to recognize the power of my story and the power of my ability to tell my story. And the main part of that, what I mean is, I focus on the healing aspect because for me, that's the important part of what my story is and my message. But there is the ugly side of it. There is the trauma and the abuse, right? And I can talk about that um, very matter of fact, like telling you that my hair's brown and my eyes are green. So it's not triggering for me when I talk about that. And there's power in that. And I realize that's part of the gift that I've been given from the universe to do my work. But as I would engage in the workplace and tell people, it was like the vulnerability in me and my authenticity was a license for them to also be vulnerable and authentic. And I found almost universally that immediately people would start to engage with me at a very deep level, wanting to share about themselves, like they needed to start getting it out themselves, right? And that's been my experience. And part of the reason why I call myself a healing mentor, because that's really what the role is, right? Is helping people through that process, right? Because I've already been there. Right. But that really is where I started to realize the power of the story and get on this journey of getting my story out there was through the work experience, which was a great experience, actually.
Which is, and it's wonderful to hear that, because I think that you're right on in terms of, I mean, and maybe this has changed a lot over the past several years, even more so, but people welcome vulnerability because that gives them permission to do the same. And being in corporate America, as we've all been, you and I have many, many years behind us in corporate America, there were times when you don't, that wasn't the kind of thing you do. And you kind of get groomed into feeling that that's not appropriate. That's not, and the more that I think now we're in a better place where people are much more receptive of it and downright helpful. Like you just said, you got the support that you needed, which is,
yes.
All that matters, right?
I do think it takes people like me and people like you who are willing to be open about it and not have that fear of what the organization or the people in the organization are going to think about you. I do think it takes more and more of us having the courage to be vulnerable and to be authentic for that to continue to move forward. I mean, we still have work to do. I mean, I had a wonderful experience, but I've talked to a number of people who are fearful or have not had as great of an experience as I have had. So there is, there's work to do, but, again, it's those of us who are out there doing it and having the courage to do it, saying, no matter what, I'm going to do this because I'm being true to myself. That's really what I think the important thing is and what we have to keep doing.
Beth, I am just, first of all, thank you for being on with us and talking about this, because, I mean, your story is so important, but beyond that, the fact that you're just getting started with this, I'm excited for you, just because I feel like, I mean, it's like you're in the right place at the right time to really be able, I mean, you really, really are. And so many people are going to benefit from that, which is just, that's what it's all about.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
All right. Well, we're going to keep in touch. I say this to a lot of people, but I'm telling you, Beth, you and I for sure are going to keep in touch.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love that, of course. I hope so.
Well, and keep us posted on what you're doing, or keep me posted. Maybe we can have you back and we can do some updates. We could maybe do an update later on.
Absolutely. Healing is an ongoing journey, and I will be healing for my entire life. And so I will keep learning as well and learning about healing. So I would love to do that.
Okay, yeah. Good. Beth, thank you. Okay, that's it for now. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Journeys Through Change podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or really wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us and leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode. And share it with a friend or on social media to spread the good word, so more women like you can find us and join in on the fun. For more information on the podcast or Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com.